Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone. It's a real honour and delight for me to be invited to come and share with you a project that has been breaking ground in Letterkenny and in Derry, or Londonderry, whichever you prefer, for really about since the beginning of June. And the project has been a complete privilege to be part of. It's, as you can see from the slide, it's called Heritage Streets Alive, and it focuses on 3 historic side streets: Church Lane in Letterkenny, Chamberlain Street in the Bogside in Derry, and Fountain Street, which is in the Fountain Estate, just outside the walled city. This is a project which I invited the communities of these 3 streets to engage in an inquiry into the strengths of the streets. And in the course of that inquiry, we were building the capacity of everyone involved, myself included. And as the process unfolded, we then leapt into the future to create new visions for the streets together. So, I suppose, first of all, why these 3 streets? They're all historic. They're side streets. They have great strengths. In the case of Church Lane, it is they're all side streets off a main commercial high street, and they're the sorts of streets that we kind of forget about when we talk about heritage. We talk about the big cathedrals and the stately homes and the guild halls, but sometimes we forget about the very modest 2 up, 2 down terraced housing, for instance, and all of these streets have that. In the case of Church Lane, it is a winding street up to St. Eunan's Cathedral, sorry. I'm mixing my cathedrals up. They are significant. Chamberlain Street is a very fine street of quite distinctive terraced houses. And I suppose some of you may not know that it is the very famous photograph from the terrible days of the Troubles, with Bishop Daly waving his white handkerchief on Bloody Sunday. That is the street that photograph was taken in. In Fountain Street, we have the last remaining terrace of workers' housing backing onto the city walls, and creeping dereliction, as you can see here at the upper end of the street. This is the only listed building in the historic part of the Bogside that falls within the historic city conservation area. And then in Church Lane, this is the view through a window which literally fell into the street just before we started the project. And this is the view where the upper floor has collapsed, and this is the furniture hanging in mid-air almost between one floor and the other. So these streets, while they have great strengths, they also have, as you can see, quite significant common issues: dereliction, vacancy, malaise, and I suppose a bit down at heel. So, what can we do about this? And we are faced with challenging times for our Irish towns. But I suppose to maybe raise a note of hope, we create our own context. And the context we have now, we have created collectively, either by our action or our inaction. And the great, great opportunity is that we can create a new context. And we create our context in language. And we can create that language today. And the language we create today will be the future. So in this project, that is what we have been doing. If I take you to what might seem like the end of the project, this was our event for Heritage Week, which was on a Saturday at the end of August. And in the case of the 3 streets, we took the visions that everyone had been working on into the streets and presented them publicly as creatively as we could, using all the skills and talents at the disposal of the people in the group. So here we are in Donnan Harvey's backyard in Church Lane, which would have been the location for the hiring fairs in that part of the country. And specially commissioned for the day was a hiring fair reenactment, a walking play from the backyard of Donnan's grandparents' house in Church Lane enacted by Blue Ribbon Performing Arts, and that took us from the lane, from the backyard, all the way up to the steps of St. Eunan's Cathedral for what was, really moving performance by the group, and I suppose a pathos and kind of the sadness of 12-year-olds being hired out to farmers from the Lagan area in Northern Ireland or Ulster. And so we moved from moments of sadness and pathos to, the strains of the Kilmacrennan traditional group at 10 o'clock in the morning. We had Millennium goalkeeper Seamus Hoare and Donnan Harvey unveiling a portrait that was unveiled especially on that day. And then we moved into Derry. We were in Chamberlain Street, where the community there brought that street alive. And we have the photo gallery of the stories and the people of that street in the old stone house, which is currently vacant. And that event was enough to bring out some of the residents in the street who we hadn't managed to engage earlier in the process. So even by Heritage Week, we were still drawing people into the project, into the conversations. In Fountain Street, an absolutely enormous, massive transformation in that street, which involved the removal of all the traffic from the street. An absolute triumph for the people involved in that group. We had people like Jackie Wilde, a resident, Kyle Thompson, who works with the Peace Walls project, and James Cullen from Letterkenny. I should say that in each case, each of the groups that worked to present a vision for their street was drawn from each of the 3 streets. So these were very mixed groups, working on each other's streets as well as their own. So Fountain Street was floral. Every house, every windowsill had a hanging basket. Pansies filled the window boxes. We had the William King Memorial Flute Band. We had old photographs of the Fountain Street back in its heyday, and a lot more. So how did we do all this? The process that unfolded is very influenced by the philosophy of appreciative inquiry, which is a strengths-based and possibilities-oriented philosophy. So this is all about inviting people in to have a conversation, to inquire into the high point experiences for them of their place, and even the high point experiences for them personally within themselves. So we had a series of workshops, 4 in total initially, and I have to be honest and say this project went from an absolute standing start. We had very, very small numbers at the beginning. We had a very tight timeline to get it off the ground, and so we were literally starting with 2 or 3 people. And in that beginning, we were asking people the sorts of questions we asked, what was magical for you as a child? What place was magical for you as a child? Think back to a time in your life when you were happiest, when you were experiencing great contentment, belonging, and what was the situation? And so the sorts of questions we asked were framed to draw out answers. They were framed positively, and they were inviting people to tell their stories and to describe the context and the situation that made that thing great, whatever it was. And we were recording it collectively as we went along, very simply, on torn up pieces of paper, keeping our budgets down. And the sorts of answers we got were that people remembered things like Christmas at home with their family. Or maybe it was a midnight walk up through Church Lane, visiting all the 4 churches, singing carols with candles lit in every window. Those were the sorts of things that people remembered. When we drilled down a little bit deeper, we were kind of trying to find out, what were the seeds of success? What was it that contributed to that really fantastic experience? And the sorts of things people were saying were things like we had a great sense of community. We knew all our neighbours. We had extended family round the corner. Or maybe it was that we lived in a terrace street, and if we came out our front door and somebody else came out the next front door, we met them on the street and we maybe walked down the street to the corner shop where we knew everyone in the corner shop. These were the common things coming up again and again. There was also a sense that people were pretty equal. They were in and out of each other's houses. That was often because of poverty. And it isn't that we would want to be taking people back to poverty, but I think the kind of lesson from that one was that people were equal enough. People weren't locking their doors so that they wouldn't be burgled, perhaps because they had nothing to be burgled for. So, moving on, our second workshop, numbers were starting to build. Here we are up in Letterkenny for the second Church Lane workshop. And I have to say, we had enormous support. This project would not have happened, partly it wouldn't have happened without the belief and vision of the Heritage Council in giving it the initial seed funding. It wouldn't have happened without the support of both local authority, the Donegal County Council and Derry City and Strabane District Council. And more importantly, it wouldn't have happened without the support of the community groups involved, the Church Lane, the Cathedral Quarter Group, and also the Peace Walls Project through TRIACS, the Area Renewal Neighbourhood Partnership in Derry. And so Donegal County Council, I have to say, put their shoulder to the wheel, and I think for practically all the workshops there was a representative from the Donegal County Council Planning Office. So we have Claire McCallan here, the Conservation Officer, engaging in the conversations along with everybody else. And that at each next workshop, we always had a recap. We were always recapping on what we had learned from the previous workshop and what had stood out for us. What did we retain in our minds? And then we kind of got our hands dirty and we rolled our sleeves up and we used historic maps through time. We had everybody tracing the maps, producing figure ground drawings, and also other maps where we picked up all the open and green spaces. And we were then able to have conversations about what we could see in the map. What was the map telling us? What things had we identified that were special for us in the previous workshop, and were they there on the map? Or were there new things on the map that we hadn't seen in our initial conversations and inquiries? And so, to give you a little flavour of the sort of thing we got up to, I'm going to actually ask all of you to engage in a little short inquiry. We have a little bit of time, I think, to do that. And very shortly, you're all going to be handed with post-it notes. I'll just hold off on that just yet until I've got a question to give you. And I want you to take a couple of minutes to reflect on the question. And then just on a post-it note, and you should only need one, possibly two. And your answer shouldn't be more than a word, or at most a phrase. I want you to write your answer on the post-it note, and then when we get to the coffee break, I would like you to put your post-it note on a flip chart stand. There's one over in the back of the room in the corner, and there's another one upstairs. And take a moment during the coffee break, have a look and see what answers everybody else gave to the question. And the question is, what matters most to you about your very, very favourite Irish street? Okay. So, once you've had a couple of minutes to think about it, write down your answer. I think we have probably got time for you to take a couple of minutes to share your answer with the person sitting next to you. Just share each other's answer. So what matters most, and I mean most, the very best thing about your very favourite Irish street? And if you don't have a favourite, just pick one. Okay? If I take you on, then that's just a little flavour of some of the things we got up to. And it's a really, really important question because it might be something we don't really think about. And once we do, we become clearer about what we need to focus on. And it's worth saying that what we focus on grows. So we can change the future by what we focus on. and by the language that we use. Moving on into the second half of our project process, this was the day we all went to visit each other's historic side streets together. And the top line of photos is a sort of a little snapshot of our visit to Church Lane. We all got on a bus in Derry and took a jaunt up to Letterkenny on a gorgeous summer day in June, I think the only one we had. And we were met by a very, very warm welcome from the Cathedral Quarter Committee, and Colin Murray even came up from Kilkenny, which we were delighted about. And we were treated to tea and coffee and lovely buns in the parish centre for the Conwall Church of Ireland Church, and had fabulous views out over the church graveyard, the open green field which lies below it, and out to the wider landscape around the town. And then we all turned round and everybody came back in to visit Fountain Street, and there we are in the bottom left, visiting Fountain Street, and Donnan is taking very keen interest in some of the details of the Fountain Street houses, and on the other side of the street, opposite the houses, are some of the vacant and at-risk outbuildings of one of the shirt factories in Derry, which we discovered that day. We thought it was just a wall, and then we discovered actually, no, this is a building. This was the former dye rooms for the shirt factory to the left of that image. And then down to Chamberlain Street, where, again, some of the residents who weren't able to participate in the project because they were working came out to have a chat. And Jim Lynch, councillor from Donegal County Council, taking a keen interest in the beautiful carving of the lintel, the stone lintel above the stone house. And we also discovered that Mary Hegarty from Letterkenny, as a young girl, used to come in on her summer holidays for 2 weeks to stay with the couple who lived and owned that stone house because they had no children. And Mary and her siblings were sort of like surrogate nieces and nephews. So we were discovering the links that existed between people in Derry and Letterkenny, and this was all part of this new conversation about our collective heritage in the Northwest, not just in 3 individual isolated streets. And then it was off to visit another street. This is, I suppose, one of our exemplars, and we were delighted it was just literally around the corner from Chamberlain Street. This is Waterloo Street in Derry. Waterloo Street backs onto the city walls. It is, I think, probably the flagship achievement of the Wall City Partnership's Townscape Heritage Initiative, which is the largest townscape heritage initiative in Northern Ireland. And I think the project officer, Ronan O'Donnell, is here, so Ronan may be able to give some of the detail on this. But Ronan met us and took us on a walk up Waterloo Street, which is worth saying. Waterloo Street was, severely affected, not just by the Troubles, but also by the opening of 2 large shopping centres in the city. And the commercial life of this street had really kind of almost fallen on the floor. And it is now home to a growing number of independent shops. A Living Over the Shop scheme funded by the Housing Executive funded the bringing back into use of residential accommodation on the upper floors. These would have always been living above shops historically. And this street was, I think, one of the places that was transformed during the year of the All-Ireland FLA, during the City of Culture. And you can see the outside seating and cafes and pubs and all the rest of it. So it was great that we were able to show everyone something so close to hand that had been achieved, that was transformative. And then we were off to Holywell Trust, one of our partner organisations in the project, for lunch. And in the afternoon, we shared our learning from the 3 streets. We had a bit of conversation about what was the almost certain future, what was likely to happen if there was no intervention. That was a fairly sobering conversation. And we drilled right down through the questions that were asked the answers that came from people revealed that people really, really understood that the long-term implications of no intervention went right down to the loss of the distinctiveness and character of these streets to the city or to the town, the diminishment of the town or city's potential as a tourist destination and the implications that had for economic regeneration. We were talking about David Geddes' research about the value of collective heritage and that these collective modest buildings are vital to the economic return from tourism to our towns. And so the outcomes of the project after our great day in Church Lane, in Fountain Street and Chamberlain Street on the 29th of August, what have we got now? What's left at the end of all of that great fun and all that chat and conversations? And we have, for instance, the work of a young volunteer from the Church Lane group, Sabina, who created over a weekend a Photoshop image of Church Lane as it might be. Transformed. The people in the image on the right are all taken from the day we were in Church Lane at the end of August. So that Saturday on the 29th of August, each of the communities in those 3 streets created the future. They created streets that are alive and vibrant and thriving. In Chamberlain Street, the very small group of people who were working to present their vision of that street, they commissioned a local artist who lives in the street, and he created a digital image of their vision, and that was unveiled on the day. And that showed all sorts of ideas for how that street would be in 2020. There it is. And you can see that we have at the end, I don't know if this is working, yeah, this end there's a gap site, the idea of a community house, a modern, very contemporary building going in to remake that end of the street. That street has lost its corner. A very unsightly gap between 2 buildings where there used to be a street, the possibility of making that into a garden. How the stone house being brought back into use, possibly as a hidden Ireland or an Irish Landmark Trust place to stay, what the street would look like at night, and then old residents telling the stories of what the place was like, really capturing the mood of what was an absolutely marvellous street for them, and can be again. And then in Fountain Street, amazing work, from what was a not much bigger group of people, 3 or 4 people in Fountain Street, and they produced an 8-page brochure, fully graphically designed, printed to the highest quality, telling the story of Fountain Street in 2020, written in the present tense, which was a requirement of their brief. And one of the ideas that there would be an arts and cultural centre in that street is something that that group is now actively pursuing. And so, to conclude, I would say that on the 29th of August, the communities of three streets created a new future that wasn't going to happen anyway for their streets. They created that future in language. The language was song, it was dance, it was art, it was writing, it was storytelling, it was photoshopping, and it was dancing. And in the Cathedral Quarter, the mural, which was in process, and this is not a Heritage Streets Alive project, but it has since been completed and mounted on the wall. A mural created out of broken up kitchen tiles, which shows it's the branding of the Cathedral Quarter for Church Lane, and that area has been created. And I think, just to conclude, I want to say that standing here now, I am the possibility of beauty and belonging. I am the possibility of a future where physical spaces, the possibility of a physical world that supports our deep human need to connect meaningfully with each other. I am the possibility of everyone having access to creating spaces of love, belonging and delight around them. We are all that possibility, and the language we use can create that future. And before I wrap up, I think he's here, Donnan Harvey from Church Lane. I think, Michael, if you'll give me a couple of minutes. Is he here, Donnan? Yeah, Donnan. Donnan Harvey was absolutely central to this project. It would not have happened without his energy, his drive. He is at the centre of the Cathedral Quarter Committee. And I suppose I'm just going to invite Donnan maybe to say a couple of words about anything that I've forgotten. I'm sure I have. Anything I've got wrong. Anything he'd like to say from his perspective as one of the people involved in the project. So Donnan, I don't even see you. Where are you? Upstairs. Oh, upstairs. So Donnan, can you speak loudly? Please. You're going to come down.
No, it was a great privilege and honour to work along with Mary and the other streets, and it's just showing the potential of what our derelict streets all around the country can become. And one of the great breakthroughs that we had, and I talked to Colin Murray about it when we visited Derry that day, that we seen how Waterloo Street has been transformed, and that the Townscape Heritage Initiative has really transformed it by working with the property owners who wanted to get their places fixed up. And I would definitely encourage the government and the powers that be that maybe we should be looking at a similar sort of scheme to be implemented here in the south, and especially for my own street in the Church Lane, where there is some of the property owners who just don't have the money at the time being, but are starting to buy into the vision of our Cathedral Quarter group and an historical quarter in the area of Letterkenny. So thanks very much, anyway. Thank you.